Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we're continuing our ongoing coverage of the war between the Russian Federation and Ukraine. Now, there has been a recent report that has been released that the Ukrainian military has sustained over 60,000 casualties in the form of amputees. Now, these are in addition to the overall wounded in action and killed in action and captured in action against Russian forces. The average age of the Ukrainian soldier, the average age, they're calling it the Dad's Army, is now 43 years old. And we have seen cases in which grandfathers are now serving in the Ukrainian military. We are starting to see women being recruited in very large numbers into the Ukrainian military forces. And this is all aspects of the Ukrainian military. This is the strategy of the Russian deep battle doctrine. The Russians, are not just looking to militarily defeat the Ukrainians on the front line, such as recent victories that have taken place in Avdiivka, that fortified city, the fortified gem of the Ukrainian army fell to Russian forces. Not just these operations. The Russians are slowly and steadily breaking the will of the Ukrainian nation to continue war. When it reaches a certain point, the Ukrainian military, the Ukrainian state, in conjunction, will break. The United States is seeing what is happening on the ground. And that's why it is very leery right now to continue to provide large amounts of military aid. Strategy thinkers, war thinkers, analysts in the United States have secretly come to the conclusion that the war is unwinnable for the Ukrainians in any facet. Now, the drawbacks of continuing to supply massive amounts of military aid is that it weakens the ability of the U.S. military to fight future-facing conflicts. And there's great concern here in the United States that the U.S. could be engaged in a very large conflict against the Chinese at some point. And thus, the U.S. would not have access to those large stockpiles, especially of 155 millimeter artillery rounds, anti-tank guided weapon systems. These systems would not be present to support that conflict. The U.S. also is aware that the Russians have the advantage in military production capacity right now. Not every weapon system on the battlefield, but the weapon systems that are proving crucial to this war, the Russians are able to produce in mass quantities. And they're also starting to uptick their capabilities in producing systems like the Su-57, the Su-35, the Su-34. These systems have been inherently a little bit more difficult for the Russians to produce in mass numbers. But the Russians are producing just massive amounts of tanks, armored infantry fighting vehicles. At the beginning of the conflict, there was widespread talk that the Russians could barely manufacture 30 to 40 tanks per month. And they are definitely, beyond a shadow of a doubt, exceeding many of those numbers. Now, we don't know the end total of, obviously, tanks that have been newly built, such as the T-90M, but other fairly effective systems, such as upgraded T-72s, T-80s, T-64s, that are being used in this conflict. But the Russians right now are simply and steadily breaking the will of the Ukrainian state, not just the military, the Ukrainian state and its will to fight. And it's very interesting to see a replay of history in terms of Russian strategy in past wars. They just don't quit. They just don't, the Russians, they don't quit. They just keep coming at you. And that's what's happening on the ground right now. Now, you got to give the Ukrainians credit. They are making a fight of it. And they have made a fight of it. And it's admirable. But at the end of the day, it's just too much. It's just too much. So we're going to continue to watch what is happening in the conflict. Thank you for joining us today. More to come very, very soon. Had to make it a brief one today. We will be making a much longer video tomorrow. Have a good day.